So my name is Cassandra Davis. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the Volunteer Services Manager at the Aquarium of the Pacific. And I am joined here today by Amy Jaecker-Jones, pronouns she, her, Coordinator for Community Science at the Natural History Museum of LA County, and Korinna Domingo, she, her, Urban Wildlife Program Manager at the National Wildlife Federation. All three of us are teaming up to bring you something really exciting because we are super pumped to be participating in the City Nature Challenge this weekend. And we hope that you will be excited to participate as well, no matter where you are from. At the beginning of our webinar, we were dropping in the chat where we're from. I saw people from all the way over in the valley through Los Angeles and down to Long Beach. So we are really excited to be representing the hills to the ocean. And that's what we're going to talk about today and what we are really excited to share with you. And it's all part of this big citywide, well, actually global-wide City Nature Challenge that we are really interested in having you join in and participate in. As we get started, I know some of you have already been using the chat, but just in case someone is new to this webinar format, I want to invite anyone who is joining us live to look for the Q&A button at the bottom of their screens or on their tablet or phone if they're using a smart device. You can go ahead and drop in your questions at any time and ask us questions about what we're talking about. We'll try to take a moment to pause for that. I'm also just going to back it up for any of you who are joining from a recording. You can reach out to any one of us after this training, and we would be happy to answer your questions as well. We have experts who are going to be helping out and getting you connected with the iNaturalist program as part of the City Nature Challenge. And that's what we're going to learn a little bit more about today. Now, I'd like to invite my fellow presenter, Amy, to give us a little bit of an overview about the City Nature Challenge. She's joining us from the Natural History Museum, which is the expert and the reason we are all here today.
Great. Thank you so much, Cassandra. I'm really excited to be here tonight with this beautiful group of people we have from all over California. Go ahead and switch over to the next slide. We want to let you know that we have some upcoming events being put on by different organizations today in relation to the City Nature Challenge, starting this weekend on Friday with a kickoff event at what will soon be the Wallis Annenberg Wildlife Corridor. They just had a groundbreaking recently, and we're going to Bioblitz that site to see what's there before we have animals start crossing over more safely. And the aquarium also has an event coming up on Saturday that we'd like to invite you to. And then I noticed somebody in the room tonight is from Santa Clarita. We are going to be doing a Bioblitz at one of our museums, the William S. Hart Museum and Regional Park, on Sunday. If you'd like to RSVP for that, we would love to have you there. And then if you get really into iNaturalist and you want to do more with it, including help make identifications for other people, we're going to be having a virtual ID party on May 4th, and we'll be teaching you how to do identifications, talking about some common plants, some common birds, reptiles, and amphibians, teaching you how to actually spot the differences between those species. And then at the bottom of the page is another link where you can find out all kinds of other events that are happening this weekend throughout the Los Angeles area. Please take a screenshot of this slide, take a picture with your phone. We would love to see you there. Go ahead and put it on the next slide.
And while I'm putting us on the next slide, I will just remind everybody, we will also send out these links to you after today's session, but I hope you will enjoy joining us at the events page to sign up for any and all of these events. Now, someone did have a quick question, which I think is worth mentioning right now. And that question was, what is a Bioblitz? So I'm hoping that, Amy, some of what you talk about is going to help us illuminate this terminology, which is kind of a crazy one and really central to what we are doing for the City Nature Challenge.
That is a great one. And I'm going to actually start with that before I get into the City Nature Challenge, because I think it's a really good introduction to that. So in essence, a Bioblitz is where a group of people to get together at generally one location for a set period of time, maybe for an hour or for a half a day. And they just go systematically or even not systematically through the area, trying to record all the different types of life that they can find in that area. Now, some bioblitzes might be targeted to specific plants or specific animals, butterflies, birds, things like that. But other bioblitzes, like the ones that most of us are holding for the City Nature Challenge, are really general. And it's an opportunity to just record what life we can find at that location during those hours. And then just kind of expanding that view a little bit, the City Nature Challenge is a giant BioBlitz. It's actually an international event that people all over the world will be exploring and documenting nature in their cities this coming weekend. So for the City Nature Challenge as a BioBlitz, that time period, instead of 1 hour or 1 day, it's actually 4 days, Friday, April 29th through Monday, May 2nd. And just to give you a little bit of background about that, and since the City Nature Challenge started in 2016 on Citizen Science Day as a competition between Los Angeles and San Francisco. We definitely have some historical rivalries going on between the two cities, and we wanted to see which one had the most nature. LA won that year, but it grew after that. It generated so much buzz that we started getting interest from cities all around the country. And so in year 2, it became a national challenge. And in year 3, it became international. Now we're in the 7th year, and we have more than 450 cities participating from over 40 countries. I'm so excited to have all of you here tonight. I hope that each one of you will be excited about the City Nature Challenge and showing what wonderful life and biodiversity and nature we have in urban Los Angeles, even, because there is so much here to be found, as Cassandra said earlier, from the mountains and the hills, all the way through the urban corridor down to the marina and our tidal areas. Next slide. So I'm going to take a few minutes and just show you some of the really cool things that we've seen in past years. There's honestly so many great observations that it's hard to narrow it down, but I'm going to share just a few of them. Next slide. In 2018, the first year that we operated as an international challenge, we had 4 observations of this Hong Kong cascade frog. It's endemic to Hong Kong, actually to a small section of southern Hong Kong, meaning that it is present there and nowhere else in the world. It's also listed on the IUCN Red List as endangered, and its population is threatened by habitat destruction and degradation. So participating in a BioBlitz event like this, or even participating in community science outside the dates of the City Nature Challenge, really helps scientists know where species are still present. And sometimes it's in very surprising places. Next slide. And then in 2020, an observer in Honduras spotted this beautiful orchid. And it was actually the first record of this particular orchid species occurring in Honduras, both in iNaturalist, which we'll talk a lot about more later, since you've heard me mention that a couple times now, and also in the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, which tracks biodiversity around the world. So another feature of a BioBlitz like this is finding things that we didn't necessarily expect to find in a location and making new records. Next slide. Also that year, a high school student spotted this white-spotted slimy salamander. It was the first record of this species in the area since 1977. It's a reminder that community scientists of all ages make valuable contributions to what we know about nature every day. Next slide. And sometimes we love the observations that come in, capturing interesting behaviors, interactions between different animals, or features that are not commonly seen, like on this earwig. One of our local community scientists found it floating in their backyard pool. And what was so interesting about this to us is that it had its wings splayed out. How many of us even know that earwigs have wings? We only see them crawling on the ground, and I didn't know they had wings before I saw this photo. But their wings are so amazing that according to Lisa Gonzalez, one of our collections managers at the museum, they're even being studied for potential applications for solar panels that can be folded and unfolded as needed for spacecraft. So it was really cool to see what these wings actually look like. And I encourage you to Google earwig wings opening. There are some really cool videos out there that show you the process. Next slide. And the last observation I want to show you is from last year. I'm sure many of you remember the Bobcat fire, but also the many other wildfires that just raged in California in the fall of 2020. Well, in the spring of 2021, a parks employee was surveying part of the area destroyed by the Bobcat fire, and they reported this Palmer's Mariposa lily, which is imperiled in the United States, and said that it actually came up where it always had in the park in the past, despite the devastation caused by the fire. So that was just super exciting to see as we do try to track these recovery areas and see what is going to come up now and in the future. These are just a few of the thousands of great observations that have been made during the City Nature Challenge. I'm really eager to see what all of you will spot this year. Next slide. Now we're going to start talking about how to participate. And it's actually really easy to do. So I've already mentioned that the dates are Friday, April 29th through Monday, May 2nd. And what you do during that time is you take photos and you can record sounds also of wild plants, animals, fungi, and other life forms, and then upload them to the iNaturalist app. And that is free and available to anybody on Google Play and in the App Store. So you can do your observations on your phone, even as you're out taking pictures of nature. And then from Tuesday, May 3rd through Sunday, May 8th, we're actually going to have some extra time to continue uploading photos and sounds that you recorded during the previous weekend and to help identify what others found. Just to note briefly, in order for the observations to count for the City Nature Challenge, all photos and sounds must have been made between April 29th and May 2nd. And then on Monday, May 9th, we'll be reporting the results to everybody. So all you have to do to participate is upload your photos and sounds to iNaturalist during the dates that I just mentioned. Any observations between April 29th and May 2nd, anywhere in Los Angeles County, even out at Catalina and, you know, I'm not sure how far into the ocean it goes, but definitely those tidal pool areas, maybe if you're out on a boat a little bit, it will automatically be added to our project also. And I know we have people here from Orange County and from Sacramento. We have challenges, projects going on in those regions too. So you should be able to still participate, and your observations will be added to those projects as well. And now I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Korinna.
Awesome. I am so excited. Next slide, please, Cassandra. So many of you may be thinking, you know, why this collaboration? You know, why is the Aquarium of the Pacific partnering with the Natural History Museum of LA County, who's in downtown LA, and also with the National Wildlife Federation, whose wildlife crossing is located in the Santa Monica Mountains? But like we've been saying throughout this event, you know, we're all connected, whether we're in the mountains, the ocean, or the city. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about that now. Next slide. So the wildlife crossing at Liberty Canyon, for those of you who are not aware, was recently named the Wallis Annenberg Wildlife Crossing. And this crossing is going to complete a wildlife corridor linking the Santa Monica Mountains to the Simi Hills Range, with an overall goal to connect to the Los Padres National Forest to the north. This is going to restore habitat connectivity and prevent the imminent extinction of this subpopulation of mountain lions, or cougars, living in the Santa Monica mountain range. Over the past several decades, this subpopulation has suffered from things like inbreeding, resulting in low genetic diversity. There's also high rates of intraspecific killings, or mountain lions killing one another due to them being so hemmed in, and also vehicle casualties, all related to this missing linkage. Next slide. And the biggest barrier to the movement of the Santa Monica Mountains cougars in this urban development, well, from the Pacific Ocean all the way to the edge of the Santa Monica Mountains, is this 10-lane highway. It's the 101 freeway. And this is the future site of the wildlife crossing. Next slide. And of course, many local species are going to benefit from this crossing as well. So you could see some of those species here in this awesome impact graphic that our architect made. Next slide. But when we design something like the Wallis Annenberg Wildlife Crossing, you know, even though the scale of the crossing itself is massive and the site is massive, it's really dwarfed in comparison to the overall watershed in the area. And so what we do at this construction site, at the site of this future crossing, is going to impact that watershed. And so without advanced planning, what you have is that sediment maybe would move down and cause challenges south of the project site, which would inevitably impact local streams and then all the way down to the ocean. And so the whole idea is what we're doing here at Liberty Canyon has a much larger impact than what we're just doing here at the site. And so we are all connected from the mountaintops to downtown Los Angeles and to the ocean. And I have a few more seconds, so I just want to walk you through what you're seeing here. So on the left hand side of the screen, you're seeing this big regional area, right? And those black arrows is the future site of the Wallis Annenberg Wildlife Crossing. As you move to the right, you'll see the Malibu River watershed, right? And then to the right, the Las Virgenes sub-watershed. And then all the way to the right, you see the actual site of Liberty Canyon and how we are reconnecting that hydrology with specific strategies. And so, you know, what we do at this project site literally impacts those people tide pooling down on the coastline. So with that, I will kick it over to Amy and Cassandra, who will be helping, oh, and myself with some training on iNaturalist.
Thank you so much. Thank you both of you for giving this wonderful overview of what we're doing and why it is so important right now. So iNaturalist is a website and an app. You can even email in your observations if you'd like to. And it is a way for you to say, hey, I saw this organism. I saw this flower. I saw this plant, this mold, this insect, this mountain lion. And it's a way for scientists and really the community to be able to see what's around, what's been spotted, and as was shared earlier, sometimes to identify this is an endangered species we haven't seen in a while, or maybe this is a pattern, a new pattern of movement, a new pattern of migration, or maybe it's just a new population that we haven't been able to track before. I am really excited about this and excited about community science in general because I work with a lot of programs that are connected to urban wildlife. And in fact, I spend a lot of time talking about urban sea turtles. That is the sea turtles that we have right here in Los Angeles that most people don't realize exist. And so Korinna and I spend a lot of time talking about these wild animals that are right in our backyards that most people don't notice or don't realize are there. And in fact, with the urban sea turtles in Los Angeles in the San Gabriel River, which is a slightly different watershed, just a little further south, those sea turtles were not thought to be there year-round until community scientists like yourselves recorded observations and were able to document those populations. So that's one of the reasons I'm so excited about things like the City Nature Challenge, which allow everybody to participate in science and in exploring their own backyards. Whether you are exploring your own backyard or going out and exploring someplace new like a tide pool, we want to give you a couple of great tips and tricks for finding wildlife, like how do I even find things to take pictures of, for using iNaturalist, and everything in between. Now, I know some of you are already downloading iNaturalist, already getting started with that. I'm really excited to see some of your observations from this coming weekend. If you would like to join, you are welcome to go to iNaturalist.org or find the iNaturalist app on your phone and be able to make these observations. A couple of tips while you're making the observations. One of the advantages of using your phone or using a camera with GPS coordinates enabled is that it does create a map that can be really useful for scientists and really useful for observation. So it is a great idea to turn that on. That was a question that was asked in our Q&A, should we have phone location turned on? It is a great idea to turn it on. However, if you are a little bit worried about your privacy, there is an option to kind of obscure the data just a little bit. So if you're in your own backyard, quite literally, you might choose that you're obscuring the data, and that will give us a reasonable range for that information. So I'll show you how to do that on your observations today. The other tip that I have is some of you might be worried about people tracking endangered species. Well, the folks at Natural History Museum were worried about that as well. And as someone who works with the White Abalone Project and the green sea turtles, two endangered species that can be threatened if too many people get near them, well, we have data obscuring for them automatically. Anything that is an endangered species, anything that is on an endangered species list will have that data obscuring automatically. So you don't have to worry about that being uploaded to the wide universe. Now, let's take some time to explore iNaturalist, and I'd like to go ahead and invite both Amy and Korinna to take a look at how we do this and what we do. How do we put on our nature eyes? How do we explore and zoom in on what's happening? Because let me tell you, I've got a picture here of a tide pool. Tide pools are some of my favorite places to explore. And a trick to this is that the more that you zoom in, the more time that you take looking and observing, the more you will notice. And to help us notice, I'm going to take us all the way over to the tide pools. We're going to come on down off the cliffs and the hills where our mountain lions might be exploring and down into the tide pool areas. You can see already where the waves are crashing, we've got a bit more life coming up. We've got algae that we can already start to observe. We've got different growth patterns. And if we look a little bit closer, we're going to notice there are a lot of different creatures that we can really begin to explore. Now, in our still picture here, in our close-up, we have a couple of different animals that we can start observing. And one of my first tricks for starting to observe is to take a moment, focus on an area, and just start watching. See what you can begin to take a look at. And take your camera, whether it's a phone, an iPad, or a digital camera, go ahead and zoom in and start to take a picture. You can take a picture while you have iNaturalist open, or you can go ahead and upload a picture after you have taken it, and you can upload it to the website. So I'm going to take a look now over to the website to help us to answer some questions. And I'm going to open this up for Amy and Korinna to ask a couple of things. And let's see if we can make some observations and learn a little bit more about using iNaturalist.
Great. Cassandra, you talked about downloading iNaturalist. And so we said earlier, it is free and it's available for both iPhones and Androids. And so once you download it, you want to go out, you're at the tide pools. How do you actually turn what you're seeing there in the tide pools into an observation?
That is a great question. There are two ways you can do it. You can do it from the app, or you can do it at home on your computer. We're going to take a look first from the app. From the app, you're just going to go ahead and tap the Observe button. And it is a kind of picture button. When you tap,
it's the visibility with the background. Maybe just right in front of your face.
Not quite happening. How's that? Is that working better? No? Yeah? Okay. Yes. So we're going to go ahead. When you open iNaturalist, it is ready for you to make observations. And you can be connected to your Wi-Fi or your cell service or not. That is the beauty, and that is something I take advantage of a lot when I'm tide pooling or even snorkeling. And I make observations, and then I go ahead and when I'm connected, I let it upload. So you start off with iNaturalist open, and right at the very center, under all your observations, if you have any, you're going to tap Observe, and then you get a chance to take a picture. Now, a couple of tips on these pictures. First and foremost, sometimes when you're observing, you might not be observing something conveniently situated in one spot like a sea anemone. You might be observing a snake or a lizard or a spider or a cougar, something that's going to move. And what I always tell people is the minute you see an organism that's going to move, take a picture. Just take a picture. If you don't have iNaturalist open, that's fine. Start with taking a picture. And that way, if you do begin to get a little closer to an organism, if you do begin to maybe make a movement, if they spot you and they walk away, run away, slither away, fly away, then you at least have that baseline picture. The other reason it's really great to take a picture right at the beginning is it gives some context and it often gives a sense of size. And that can help scientists in identification as well. In marine organism identification, again, going back to those things that don't slither away, sometimes how big an anemone is can help with that identification factor. So we're going to start by taking a picture. And once you've taken a picture, you might go ahead and either take it within iNaturalist or upload it later. You can go ahead and from iNaturalist, the website, from your home page, you can actually add an observation as well.
Great, thank you. So let's say that I'm taking pictures, I'm capturing the moment, taking lots of pictures of the sea anemones. How many of them should I add to my observation?
Ooh, that is a great question. Usually you can get a good sighting with about 3 to 5 pictures. So I know that sometimes when you're starting to get a picture of an animal, you take
Sandra, you just muted.
Oh no, there we go. Sorry about that. So sometimes you are really excited that you've seen something, or you just have, you want to make sure that you get the best possible picture. Maybe, I know I've tried to get pictures of birds where I'm like, okay, I'm waiting for them to look at me, or I'm waiting for just that perfect profile picture. But when it comes down to your pictures and your observations, it's going to really be the best for everyone, including yourself and your data plan, if you have about 4 or 5 pictures at the most. So I can go ahead and open up one of these pictures. This was over at the El Dorado Nature Center, and I've just got 2 pictures, one at the top, one at the side view. Now this is a flower. Maybe since it is something that is standing still, if I could have gotten a few more angles, or 1 or 2 more pictures to have it be better in focus, especially if there might be some identifying factor that I'm not aware of because I'm not an expert in flowers. Sometimes there are identifying features like the way the pollen looks, maybe even the way the leaves look. So it's not always that picture perfect picture, but it's the bigger picture. What else can you include context-wise that might help a scientist to identify it?
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
And so I've taken my pictures, but I really don't know what something is. So is it okay if I add it to iNaturalist, even if I don't know what it is? I might know it's a bird, but nothing else.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, that is my favorite use of iNaturalist. I know quite a few sea creatures. I know some local land creatures, but I am not very good with plants. I'm not an expert on birds. And so I use iNaturalist to find out what was that, especially if it was an insect. When you add it in, try to give it the best general category you can. So you know it's a bird. Perfect. Especially during the City Nature Challenge, scientists and even people who might be birders in their hobby time, they're going to be looking at all of the categories of birds and trying to identify them. And if you can give it just that basic category, sometimes even a broad category like plants or insects, that's going to get people started, and it's going to alert the people who might be studying that specific type of organism to find out what it is. One of my favorite identifications was of a orange peel fungus that I had no idea even existed, and it is very aptly named. It looks just like somebody threw some orange peels down on the ground. And as soon as I got it identified on iNaturalist, I started seeing it on hikes everywhere. And then I looked like this amazing expert because I had that identification.
Perfect. So especially if I'm using my phone and not on the website, how do I know if somebody has identified my observation?
Oh, you get a notification. That's a great question. So as your different organisms are identified, you will get an alert. Sometimes you can even turn on or off in your preferences. So if I went up to my profile, it can turn on or off how I would like to receive my notifications, whether it is on email or whether it is on my notifications on my phone. I get a daily digest of what people have identified that I have put up there, or suggestions from people. Now, some of you have identified that you use Seek, which is amazing. Seek is also a way to find out what something is when you're looking at it. And Seek is great to use if it is something that's probably a known quantity. And it is a way for you to kind of have the Google lens on all the organisms that you might be encountering. When would you use iNaturalist versus Seek? Well, if you would like to go ahead and be able to be part of that discussion and part of that research. So again, if you go to notifications, you can have these different notifications for things like identifications. If somebody is saying, hey, I think that that iris that you saw was this specific plant. I've been involved in some really interesting debates, and not always ones that I participate in, ones where other people are trying to narrow down, okay, I think that this sparrow was a Belding savanna sparrow, or no, I noticed that the marking here doesn't quite match. And it is really interesting to be part of that research, to be part of that science and part of that community. Does that help a little bit with what you might use iNaturalist for, and also how to get those notifications that somebody has spotted something that you are observing?
Absolutely. And I wanted, already talked about geoprivacy, but I'd just like you to tell people when you how to actually do that when they're making an observation on their phone, because that's something that so many people care about, especially if there are children in your lives or you're making observations at home. As somebody mentioned in the chat, also concern for those species that may, we don't want to show where they were.
Absolutely. And I'm going to show you that you can do it while you are going and on your phone, or you can do it as a follow-up if you'd like to, whichever you feel more comfortable doing. And when it comes to your geoprivacy, that is really important. And it is something that iNaturalist takes very seriously. So you can adjust the observations and the details when you edit your geoprivacy, when you edit your iNaturalist observation. And you can also do it while you are uploading and while you are observing. So when you go to upload, it's in your main list where you're going to say, I think this was a red-eared slider. And then you're going to say, is it captive or is it something that's natural? So captive or cultivated. And that would be, as someone was asking a little bit earlier, that would be something like your neighbor's chicken. So we don't necessarily want your neighbor's chicken on our City Nature Challenge. We want to focus on those wild species that are in our backyard. But was it captive or cultivated is a question here. And if you think it was, go ahead and check that box. You'll also have some options for adjusting things like time and even that geolocation. And there's an option to go ahead and change that geoprivacy. So it looks a little bit different on the website versus the app. On the app, it's all lined up 1, 2, 3. On the website, it is underneath this big map. And underneath this big map, you can say it's open. So in this case, I was in a public park. I think it is really helpful for them to have a record of what was in their space. This was in El Dorado Park in Long Beach. But if you are in a place where, like I said, you might be close to home, you don't want to have a track of where you are, you can go ahead and select obscured. And you can even select private if you'd like to. There's a little question mark next to this option that actually describes what this means. So open is everyone sees those coordinates. Everybody sees exactly where it was, unless it's a threatened animal or species. And then obscured shows something like within that general area, but it's not quite your home address. And finally, private. This is completely hidden from the public maps. Those true coordinates are visible to you in your app, but other people who are just browsing won't see it. There are some curators of projects who would be able to see that information. So if you select that you are adding this to the red-eared slider project, we'll talk about projects in just a moment, but if you are adding it to a project, then the curators of those projects, that is the people who are researching those animals, they would be able to see it, but only them. Does that help a little bit with the geoprivacy and where things are located?
Absolutely. And you mentioned captive cultivated. Can you kind of explain what that means for people? And for Bioblitzes like the City Nature Challenge, can people make observations of captive or cultivated things?
A great question. So captive cultivated is really looking at, was it something that somebody has really raised? Have they planted it there? Is it their pet? Is it an animal at the aquarium that's inside of our campus that can't fly away? Those are those captive and cultivated items. And the reason that we are not focused on them for the City Nature Challenge is because the City Nature Challenge is really taking a look at nature that is here in this urban environment. What can we make observations on? Now, that being said, if you're practicing, if you are just getting the hang of it, you want to see how it all lays out, and you're like, hey, the only thing I can find right now or think of is this sunflower that I planted 3 months ago. That's okay. Make that observation. Take that picture, upload it, try it out, check off the captive cultivated box. You can absolutely make those observations, but in the City Nature Challenge, those are filtered out. So we do ask that if it is something that you know is captive and cultivated, please do check that box. Now, it's really interesting to be having that conversation while we're looking at this red-eared slider that is in a park that is a nature park. But this nature park has gone through a lot of restoration, and red-eared sliders are not native to this area. These red-eared sliders are kind of captive cultivated. So they're in this weird gray area, and it is okay if you're not sure to go ahead and check that box. And we can kind of go from there. For this space, since it is a space that is open waterway and it does go from point A to point B to point C, I do leave that unchecked because these red-eared sliders can actually be part of the different ponds and waterways throughout this entire park. That is kind of an interesting subject of debate amongst a couple of iNaturalist groups as to like, when does a restoration cease becoming captive cultivated and when does it become something you're recording?
Well, thank you so much. So I want to go ahead and switch gears just a little bit here, although if you have questions that we don't talk about right now, please keep sending them and we'll try to answer them in the chat or verbally here as we go along. You can also reach out to any of us afterwards and we will help answer your questions. So how can we behave ethically when we're out at a Bioblitz or even in our local park or on the street in front of our apartment building? Korinna, can you give us some tips for that?
Yeah, Korinna.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a really important topic and something that's really close to my heart. So being a responsible community scientist means putting your safety and the safety of wildlife above taking a photo. So you can respectfully interact with and observe nature and wildlife. So for example, for like large mammals, say you see a coyote on your morning hike, make sure to keep your distance and just don't cause wildlife unnecessary stress. If you plan to, handle wildlife, I do suggest that, I like to not disturb animals as much as possible. And so I really limit the type and the type of species and how many I pick up just for an observation. So I tend to stay away from that. But if you're going to handle wildlife, such as a little roly-poly or a pill bug that you found in the soil, always be gentle, especially if you're using tools like bioglasses or magnifying lenses, and always be sure to place the animals back where you found them. So I think that that's a really important topic. And also, you guys, as we're doing these observations in urban environments, please pay attention to your surroundings. Don't go chasing a bird and walk into a road or an unsafe situation. I know I can get really distracted when looking at wildlife and plants. And so just be sure to be aware of your surroundings. It is, the time of year where we're seeing rattlesnakes and other animals that are on the trails with us. And so, and even at the tide pools, Cassandra knows probably more than anybody else on this call that people can slip. Even the most, seasoned folks can slip, especially at tide pools. So just be sure to be responsible and take your safety seriously and the safety of animals seriously as well.
And I'll add to that,
yes,
protect your equipment too. We have at the tide pools, we have had octopus grab cameras. We have had people slip and lose iPhones. And so it's, yes, be aware of your surroundings, but I know sometimes I'm a little more careful when I'm like, okay, I have to really protect my phone now. And so sometimes that's a good reminder. Just be careful of what you're carrying around with you and what you have with you. It's a great idea to kind of leave no trace, try not to disturb what's around you. And a good rule of thumb is that if an animal is changing its behavior because you're present, then maybe it's time to consider taking a step back and seeing if you can disengage.
Wow, I wish an octopus stole my camera. No, just kidding.
No, you don't. It's a great
Oh,
story,
wow.
but it's an expensive one.
Absolutely. Wow, those are some great tips, though. And a lot of us will be out there this weekend taking pictures on our phones. We don't have big fancy cameras to do that with. So can you kind of share some tips for how we can take good photos, especially photos that are really going to be helpful to scientists with our phones?
Absolutely. Phones have really increased in their ability to take wonderful pictures. Be aware of how the phone is tilted, like are there any reflections? I always think of that when I'm thinking of tide pools, and try to take a look at how that picture is being reflected or being used in the observation that you're making. I was going to open this up just to see if I could pull up some of the pictures that I have where I've actually used a little pointer. And again, being very conscientious of not making a impact, not picking things up, not poking things. This is especially important with things like anemones that can be soft and squishy. But maybe using a pen, or one thing we've used is a zip tie. Zip tie makes a great pointer. So if you have something where you're taking a picture with a phone of something small like an insect, it's really great to be able to point it out so that people who are making an observation can really see what you were intending them to identify. The other thing to be aware of is that our phones, very few of them, have a physical zoom on them. Most of the time, your zoom on your phone is going to look great on your screen and not very great on a computer screen. So it is always best to just leave that standard picture. And if you do zoom in really just to identify, like, here's the part of the picture I want you to look at, and then take some full-size pictures without the zoom as well, because a lot of times when we use the zoom on our phone, it actually ends up creating a picture that's harder to see, strangely as that might sound.
Yes, I love all of those tips, Cassandra and Amy, but I just wanted to make sure, I may be going out of order here, but somebody just asked a really great question in the Q&A, and I really want to make sure that we get to it. Susan asked that there are a lot of non-natives, but we're in them too, right? So for example, they have eastern fox squirrels in their yard. And so Amy, can you talk a little bit about how the Natural History Museum is looking at squirrels through the Southern California Squirrel Survey, and also some of the questions that your ornithologist, Dr. Allison Schultz, is looking at in the area with non-native birds?
Absolutely. So one of our colleagues in the community science program started the Southern California Squirrel Survey a number of years ago. And this tracks what type of squirrels are spotted in various locations throughout Los Angeles. So if any of us were to look outside today and see a squirrel, it would probably be this fox squirrel that actually is not native to Los Angeles or even California. Stories even actually say that it came here through Civil War soldiers many years ago, and then just established a population. And so, as often happens in Los Angeles, especially if we have the port, we have a booming nursery trade, different types of plants and animals get introduced here all the time. Sometimes they don't take off and really start thriving in the environment, but sometimes they do. Like the parrots that you might hear flying overhead, waking you up at 5 a.m.
I have so many, oh my gosh, in my
so
neighborhood.
Many out here too.
That's an example of an animal that has really thrived in our Southern California environment, but it hasn't reached the level of an invasive species here yet because it's not really hurting other things that are in the environment and outcompeting them. Sometimes things do become invasive species. So our scientists like to track these things, especially if there's something that hasn't been spotted before. And Allison Schultz, our curator of ornithology, is particularly interested in birds that we're finding in Los Angeles that haven't been previously spotted. We've also done a number of studies on snails and slugs and reptiles and amphibians that are new to the area. In fact, I love talking about when kids spot things that adults don't spot. There's a story about, I don't know how many years ago, but a boy was like a backyard barbecue. And I believe this was actually in Orange County because we really like to look the whole Southern California region, and spotted a lizard that just didn't look recognizable to him. And he asked his dad about it. And his father wasn't really familiar either. It eventually came to our attention at the museum, and it was a new record for that species in the area. And so Greg Polly, our curator for herpetology, was able to go out, was able to document it, find more, and has actually worked with community scientists to find out if something is a one-off or if it has established a population. And some of our community scientists, including that child, have ended up as co-authors on papers that have been written. I want to point out the time here. We've got 5 minutes left. I know there have been some great questions in the chat that we've been trying to answer there. If you have any more, feel free to put them in the chat. I'm just going to go quickly through a couple things that I did read in case people were not able to see the answers in the chat. In terms of putting in your location, can you zoom in on the map and document the location? And you absolutely can. Sometimes, especially before I had a phone with GPS and I was just doing this only using the website, I would zoom in actually to like a particular tree because you can use that satellite view to really pinpoint where you were. And then something about when you want to picture as close as possible so that the app can accurately identify the organisms. Is that something, forgive me if I've forgotten, Cassandra, did you talk about the AI feature at all?
I did not. I didn't get to that, but yes, that is an amazing feature. And we sort of touched on that when we were talking about Seek and talking about using it for identification. There is an option as you're taking that picture for like suggest ID, and you can actually get a pretty close suggestion using the AI, using the iNaturalist system. And correct me if I'm wrong, it's the same system that they're using in Seek as well, from what I understand.
It should be, yes. Yeah. And both of them, they're constantly fine-tuning their computer vision. Yeah. Somebody had asked in the chat earlier about agreeing with other people's identifications. And I think that this is a good rule of thumb when you're looking and seeing what suggestions iNaturalist comes up with also. Yeah. It's okay to be really conservative. If somebody else on iNaturalist or if iNaturalist itself suggests something and you're really not sure about it, you don't have to agree with it or accept that identification. You can put in bird or plant. It might not get ID'd right away. During the City Nature Challenge, there's a lot of observations, but I tell you, I'm still getting identifications from things that I put in there 6 years ago, but I'll also get same day identifications most days when I'm using the app.
And I'll point out, I'm sharing something that I pulled up while we were having the discussion on like, do we want to have pictures of things that aren't native? What does that look like? Because I find it really fascinating. Again, I'm not an insects person, but ladybugs, lady beetles they're something I grew up with. They're something I find and I try to take pictures of. And here on the screen, I have two lady beetles. One has an N in the top right-hand corner and a color code of green. One has a pink color code and the IN. And these are two different lady beetles that to me would look exactly the same. But the advantage of having the scientists looking at it and making those observations and really just stepping back and saying, I'm not the expert, but will somebody who is the expert tell me, is you get these really fine-tuned observations. You get these really fine-tuned identifications, including one that is a native and one that is a non-native. So if you aren't sure about a color coding or a symbol or something else that's on the app or on the website, on the app, you can tap on it. On a website, you can hover your mouse over it and you'll get this little explanation that tells you what that means. So it's a very intuitive way of going through the iNaturalist program in general.
Great, thank you. Go ahead, Korinna.
No, I was just saying, such good questions. We've been trying to get to all of them in the chat. We've answered a lot of them live, but what great engagement tonight. Let's get one more from Susan before we hop off. Are we only recording a specific species once per day, or do you want numbered seen? For example, will you enter all 5 willets seen if seen in different locations, or just the one of that day? Amy, you want to take that one?
Sure. So that's kind of a matter of how you want to interact with iNaturalist and the City Nature Challenge. I'll be really frank here and say that one year my younger son participated at a park that had a lot of snails, the kind where you look at it on the tall plants and all of them are covered in snails. He went through documenting, you know, everyone he could until he was just absolutely bored by it. And that may have bordered on too many. He was young though, and I loved his enthusiasm. And honestly, iNaturalist is about how you want to interact with nature and how you want to interact with iNaturalist. So if I was in that same situation today, I would definitely put in the first snail that I saw. And then I might walk a half mile and maybe I'd put in another one then. You know, if it's in a different area, honeybees are another one. Last year for the City Nature Challenge, I put in several honeybees, and I don't normally do that because they're just so common. But I was really thinking, oh, I'm at this pocket park. And if anybody wants to know what's at this pocket park, I wanted them to have a complete list. So I put in a honeybee there, and then I went to the next pocket park and I put in a honeybee there. But in general, if I'm out at a park or on a hike or walking in my neighborhood, I'll be kind of sparing in how many of a certain kind of animal or plant I'll put in.
I will just add one detail on that. Sometimes, depending upon the species, knowing that there were many in one spot can help with identification. So I pulled up one that is a big one in a lot of our tide pools. That's the aggregating anemones, and they actually clone themselves. So all of these anemones together makes a really easy identification when we see them all together. So if you have something, whether it is a swarm of bees or aggregating anemones or a flock of birds, if you have something that's all gathered together, there's no need to identify or no need to put in each one as an independent observation, but put in the group as an observation. And that can help the identifiers with making that final identification as well.
And then I promise this is the last question, but we've gotten it a few times, Amy. So to participate in the City Nature Challenge, do they have to register or do anything else with their observation, or do they simply just go to iNaturalist and upload their observations during the time frame of City Nature Challenge?
Okay, I'm going to give a caveat to my answer simply because I know there are some people who may not live in an area whose city is participating in the City Nature Challenge officially. So if you are in one of the cities, and maybe we can put the city list into the chat again, that is participating, you can go to that project. And some cities like Los Angeles, we all know it's many cities. And we actually have our boundary set as Los Angeles County. In the Bay Area, they're including 5 counties in their project area. So you can look at the iNaturalist project and actually see if where you are is included or not. If you're inside that boundary, when you use iNaturalist from April 29th to May 2nd, they'll automatically be added. That's the way the projects work. Now, for those of you who may live in an area that isn't covered by one of those projects, we still want you to participate. We still want to see all the awesome nature you have in your cities. And so that's why we have a global project. And so this is the caveat for the global project, because it's not one specific geographic boundary. You actually have to join that project. You have to become a member of it. As long as you're a member, you don't have to do anything else. April 29th to May 2nd, all observations will automatically be added to it. So please, Cassandra and Korinna, help me remember to share the city list and the global project and our resources for this event. I want to make sure people can participate if they want to.
Great.
And Bettina, I know that you're really interested, so I'm going to answer your question about research grade, because it is something that is like, not just you, a lot of people are really interested in. Research grade observations, for those who are not familiar with it yet, mean that a certain subset of the community has agreed on an identification. And those are the ones that scientists will most often use because they have that community agreement standard. And those are actually then funneled to the Global Biodiversity Information Facility as well, which has even bigger collections of nature and even more scientists use them. Now, not every observation is going to make it to research grade for a couple of reasons. Sometimes people can't agree. And so it needs to have 2/3 of the people who are offering identifications agree in order to become research grade. Sometimes it slips through the cracks because there's just so many observations. That's why I mentioned that I'm still getting identifications from 6 years ago, because I don't want you to give up. Check back regularly, like things do get identified. Sometimes they won't reach research grade because a particular photograph doesn't have as much detail as it needs to ID it. And sometimes something, especially like spiders and insects, can't be identified by photos. And this is where I want to get to your question about genus, Bettina. The way iNaturalist does things kind of differs, whether it's in how you view it, like whether it's a project part of the City Nature Challenge, or if you're looking at your own life list, the research grade and the species might be a little bit different. In some cases, you can only get as far as the genus and no more. And in that case, it might make it to research grade. It might be counted as one of your species. But in other cases, and a lot of this has to do with the way different projects are set up, or iNaturalist, the viewpoints that people are looking at, they call these leaves. But in other cases, it actually needs to be at the species level to become research grade. And I'm sorry I can't give you a more straightforward answer than that, but I hope it does help. Yes, Bettina, are you able to unmute yourself? No, okay, I'm sorry, not in the webinar.
Yeah. And we can definitely follow up with you afterwards as well if you still have some fine detail questions that you would like to ask of us. I do want to be respectful of everybody's time. It is a little bit after 8 o'clock, and we did have somebody who typed in a question. I think it's a great one to close on, and that is, you're already using some other identifying app, no matter what it is there an advantage to using iNaturalist over that other community science identifying app such as eBird? And I'm going to just chime in and say, use what works for you. All of these apps are helping to contribute to community science, to a greater knowledge of what's going on around us. They're all really exciting. We live in an incredibly exciting time where we get to measure and observe and record and begin to know these things that were hidden to so many people for so long. You get to participate in real science. As Amy was mentioning, sometimes you get to be an author on a paper or co-author on a paper because there's a new species that was discovered or a new range for an animal. I will encourage all of you that on this coming weekend that you use the iNaturalist app and record everything. So with iNaturalist, you're not limited to one species or subset. Record everything, record the plants, record the fungus, record the insects, record the slugs. There are some really great ones out there. Record the big things and the small. And it is so much fun to just get out there and really start looking, put your nature eyes on and see what you can discover, see how much moves in just a few square feet. After this weekend, go ahead and keep using whatever works best for you. One of the neat things about this Bioblitz is what we're doing is we are just trying to get as many people out there making as many observations as possible because we discover some wild and wonderful things that way. And we hope that you will help to contribute to this research and contribute to this knowledge that's right here in our backyards to see what we can discover. So once again, I've got up there the list of our upcoming events. If you want someone to be there, we will be at some of these events. And there are many more that might be closer to your neighborhood. But these are the ones that are kind of local. We tried to pick a Friday, a Saturday, and a Sunday. And we encourage you to get out there and see what you can discover. Who knows, maybe it'll be your name on the next nature page that is talking about a new species or a new range. And I'd also like to just take a moment to really thank Korinna and Amy and thank the National Wildlife Federation, the Natural History Museum, and the Aquarium of the Pacific for all of the wonderful work that they do and for letting us have this opportunity to get to know you and to chat with you and introduce you to iNaturalist and the City Nature Challenge. So thank you everybody so much for joining us. And Amy, Korinna, any last words?
Feel free to reach out to us anytime with questions. Our email is here and we'll follow up with some additional resources probably tomorrow. It's a little late, so you guys will get an email from us soon with all of that.
And just thank you for joining us tonight. We're so happy to spend this time with you.
Absolutely.